began on December the 22nd.
It will go down in history and folk memory as that terrible winter of 1963. Chaos turned into crisis.
The wind was so cold that the sea froze on the Essex coast.
The bitter weather went on, even the coast and harbour started to ice up. At several places the sea froze, sometimes for 100 feet out from the shore. There was pack ice in most ports. On the Humber it forced a lightship adrift, and there were sheets of ice in the docks at Chatham, Liverpool, Bristol and Southampton.
200 main roads were impassable, and 95,000 miles of road were snowbound.
By New Year's Day, at least 11 people had died as a direct result of the blizzard.
It was the coldest January since records were first kept in 1841.
The Grand Union was a strip of ice running from Brentford to the Midlands.
Before the first snow had even looked like melting, in fact, while most of it was still lying where it had fallen, there came another and even greater blizzard.
It was the worst blizzard for 15 years, and in southern England, the worst avalanche of snow in living memory. With this blizzard on top of the heavy Boxing Day fall, there were now drifts of 15 and 20 feet. Motorists were advised to take no journeys whatsoever, not even essential ones. Hundreds of villages were isolated.
Expresses were cancelled and schedules thrown out of the window. Blizzard was blowing. The drifts were 20 foot high, after which the whole lot froze solid, and it took 80 men over a week to dig them out and get them running again. Planes were frozen in.
And the effect was total paralysis. Farmers had stopped thinking about producing to survive. It was now a question of surviving to produce. As blizzard followed blizzard, more and more farms needed supplies from helicopters. People in towns who complained about clearing the front path never had to undertake an engineering project on this scale. Over half the nation's broccoli crop was destroyed. Sugar beet factories closed for lack of supplies. The milk situation was nearly desperate. The sheep. In the murderous winter of 1947, 4.5 million died. Nothing on that scale has happened yet, but it's been a terrible time for lambing.
All over Britain, the streets rang to the sound of shovels.
In London alone, the Metropolitan Water Board have had well over 3,000 burst mains reported since the cold weather started. In Birmingham, hundreds of underground service pipes froze solid, and in the Manchester area, the number of bursts of all kinds approached the 200,000 mark.
The Channel froze at Dover and Eastbourne, and across at Dunkirk, the ice stretched for 5 miles. At Kingston, the Thames froze from bank to bank for the first time since 1895. But many rivers froze up along the edges of the navigable channel. On some, the ice was 2 feet thick, and an iceberg 10 feet high was sighted at Greenwich. It grew so cold that diesel oil froze solid and beer and lemonade bottles burst. Ferry services were cancelled, and so was the London-Paris train. The coastline of Britain was like an enormous deep freeze. For the first time in living memory, the Medway froze right across from Chatham to Rochester.
In Piccadilly, the lights went out for the first time since 1949. Hospitals were cut off without warning. Canterbury Cathedral blacked out in the middle of a service. It soon became apparent that someone had underestimated our electricity requirements, even for a normal winter. Salt, water, gas, electricity, paraffin, milk, milk bottles, vegetables, coal, candles, disposable nappies. All of these were difficult or impossible to get.
Water rationing was the order of the day, and the emergency water tanker became a familiar sight.
In other places, tanks were set up in the street. But even they froze up, and you needed hot water to thaw out the tap before you could get cold water to make hot water with.
Shops and offices kept going by candlelight. As the load increased, the supply dropped. The Electricity Board admitted that they'd had to make massive disconnections in the southeast, and practically no one in the country had full power right through the crisis. It soon became clear that we simply couldn't cope with the cold spell of this severity and duration.
Milk roundsmen had to take the day off from exhaustion.
Emergency lorries ran through the ice and snow in a never-ending stream. As a Coal Board official said, we were on a knife edge. Rely on gas, the ad said. But alas, we couldn't rely on gas. Gas couldn't cope either. The demand for gas rose everywhere, and where they could deliver, they couldn't keep up with the demand.
3 days after the thaw, the freeze was back with a vengeance. The blizzards followed. Again, the West Country took the first onslaught, but Wales caught a packet as well. When the blizzards stopped, we took stock again. and found it was worse than ever. On the 8th of February, 70 people were marooned in cars and lorries around Dartmoor. 30 people were trapped in a train on Dartmoor too, 50 in Argyllshire and another 18 in Ayrshire. All over Britain, motorists and highway authorities started digging out yet again. This time, it was worse than ever before. Again, 200 main roads were blocked, and now not 90,000, but 130,000 miles of highway were obstructed by snow, most of them paralysed. Scotland and Cornwall were completely cut off. It was the night when the southwest broke another weather record. Snow on the ground for 45 consecutive days. But by now, the hard-hit southwesterners were being warned of another new danger, a quick thaw with high winds and floods. The floods came. The river near Boscastle in Cornwall burst its banks, and a wall of water 4 feet high smashed through the village. This country put the death toll at 120, directly attributable to the very cold spell. The severe weather filled the nation's hospitals, and in the London area, the emergency bed service's red warning was in operation. Hospitals refused routine admissions so as to cope with emergencies. The road clearance bill is expected to come to over £20 million. It's £3 million at the most on average. And millions more will have to be spent in repairing the roads and motorways cracked by the freeze. In all, the interim estimate of the physical costs of the nation is said to be 150 to 200 million pounds, and many believe this to be an underestimate.
The big freeze has shown is that the country is simply not geared to meet an abnormally savage winter.
We've been through the big freeze of 1963.
But it was surely those two commuters skating to work in Leicestershire that provided the picture of the big freeze.